The certified mail envelope sat on Simone's marble kitchen counter like a poisonous snake, its official seal mocking the remnants of her wedding cake still in the refrigerator. She had been married for exactly 31 days. 31 days of blissful ignorance, 31 days of believing that 15 years of love had finally been sealed with the promise of forever. Her hands trembled as she tore open the envelope, her morning coffee growing cold as the words on the legal documents burned themselves into her mind like acid. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The phrase swam before her eyes. Respondent demands equitable distribution of marital assets totaling approximately $200 million. Simone's knees buckled. She gripped the granite counter so hard her knuckles turned white. $200 million. That was nearly everything she had built from nothing over the past 15 years. Her tech company, her real estate investments, her patent royalties, everything she had created with her own brilliant mind and relentless work ethic. The papers slipped from her fingers and scattered across the floor like fallen leaves, each page another dagger in her heart. This couldn't be real. This had to be some terrible mistake or a sick joke. Jonathan, her Jonathan, the man who had held her hand through every late night of coding, every business meeting, every celebration of success, he couldn't have done this to her. But there it was, in black and white, signed by Jonathan Rivers, her husband of 1 month, her partner of 15 years, the man she had trusted with everything. Simone's phone buzzed against the counter. A text message from Jonathan. Sorry you had to find out this way. My lawyer will contact you soon. This is just business, nothing personal. Nothing personal. 15 years reduced to nothing personal. She scrolled up through their text history, looking at the messages from just yesterday. Good morning, beautiful. Can't wait to see you tonight. Love you more than words can say. So glad we finally made it official. The lies felt like physical blows to her chest. How long had he been planning this? How long had every kiss, every I love you, every shared dream about their future been nothing but an elaborate performance? Simone's reflection stared back at her from the black screen of her phone, a successful African-American woman who had built an empire from a small apartment, who had been featured on magazine covers, who had been invited to speak at tech conferences around the world. Everyone called her a genius, a visionary, an inspiration. But she had been blind to the snake in her own bed. The wedding photos still lined the mantel in the living room, showing their perfect ceremony in Napa Valley. 300 guests had watched them exchange vows under a canopy of white roses. Jonathan had cried real tears as he promised to love and cherish her in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do them part. The whole thing had cost $200,000, money that now seemed like payment for her own destruction. She picked up one of the scattered legal papers. The document outlined how Jonathan's legal team claimed he was entitled to half of everything she had earned during their common-law partnership over the past 15 years. They were arguing that despite never being legally married until a month ago, their long-term relationship constituted a business partnership that entitled him to her assets. The cruelest part was how they were using her own success against her. Every patent she had filed, every contract she had signed, every investment she had made, it was all being twisted into evidence that Jonathan deserved half of her life's work. Simone's phone rang. The caller ID showed her best friend and business partner, Tasha. Girl, you need to see the news. Tasha's voice was tight with anger. They're saying Jonathan gave an exclusive interview to Business Today about your messy divorce. He's making it sound like you're trying to cut him out of what he helped build. What? Simone's voice came out as a whisper. He's telling everyone he was your silent partner, that he gave up his own career to support yours, that you promised him half of everything. Simone, he's destroying your reputation while he steals your money. The room started spinning. This wasn't just about money, this was about destroying everything she had worked for. Her credibility, her business relationships, her future prospects. Jonathan wasn't just taking her wealth, he was systematically dismantling her entire life. But as the initial shock began to wear off, something else started growing in Simone's chest. Not sadness. Not heartbreak. Rage. Pure, crystalline rage that sharpened her mind like a blade. Jonathan had made a critical mistake. He had underestimated her. He thought she would crumble, that she would pay him off quietly to avoid a public battle. He thought the woman who had built a tech empire from scratch would simply roll over and accept his betrayal. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Simone gathered the scattered papers, her movements precise and controlled. She walked to her home office and opened her laptop. If Jonathan wanted to wage war using lawyers and media manipulation, she would give him a war. But she would fight with the one weapon he had never truly understood, her brilliant, calculating mind. She began typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she started documenting everything. Every shared account, every joint investment, every conversation she could remember. If Jonathan thought 15 years of partnership entitled him to her fortune, he had forgotten one crucial detail. She remembered everything, and she had always been better at playing the long game than anyone realized. The woman who had revolutionized cloud computing before she turned 30 was about to revolutionize revenge. 15 years earlier, Simone Carter had been a broke graduate student eating ramen noodles in a studio apartment, coding late into the night on a second-hand laptop that crashed every few hours. She was 23, brilliant, and completely alone in Silicon Valley with nothing but an idea that everyone said would never work. That's when Jonathan Rivers walked into her life like he was designed specifically to save her. She met him at a coffee shop near Stanford, where she was trying to debug code while surviving on her third cup of free coffee. Her laptop had crashed again, and she was staring at the blue screen of death when a voice behind her said, "Try holding down the power button for 10 seconds, then restart in safe mode." When she turned around, she saw a tall, handsome man with kind eyes and the sort of easy smile that made her forget she hadn't slept in 36 hours. Jonathan was 25, working as a marketing consultant, and unlike every other man in Silicon Valley, he didn't try to mansplain her own code to her or pitch his own startup idea within the first 5 minutes of conversation. "I'm Jonathan," he said, sliding into the chair across from her without invitation but somehow making it feel welcome. "And you look like someone who's about to change the world but might need a better laptop to do it." He was right. Within 6 months, Simone had developed the breakthrough cloud computing algorithm that would eventually make her fortune. And Jonathan was there for every step of it, bringing her coffee during all-nighters, celebrating every small victory, holding her when investors rejected her pitch for the 15th time. "I believe in you," he would say, and at the time, those words meant everything to a young woman who had been told repeatedly that there was no place for someone like her in tech. When her first investor finally said yes, Jonathan was the first person she called. When she signed her first major client contract, he took her out to celebrate at a restaurant they couldn't afford. When Forbes featured her on their 30 under 30 list, he framed the magazine cover and hung it in their tiny apartment. He seemed to understand that her success was their success, that they were building something together. While she handled the technical side, he gradually took over marketing and business development. He was charming with clients, good at networking, and had a way of making people trust him instantly. "You're the brains, I'm the face," he would joke, and it seemed like the perfect partnership. As Simone's company grew, so did their relationship. They moved to a bigger apartment, then a house, then a mansion in the hills. Jonathan's role in the company became more prominent, though he was never officially an owner or partner. Simone had always been careful about business structure, something about keeping personal and professional separate, she told herself. But Jonathan never seemed to mind. He was content to be known as Simone Carter's boyfriend, then partner, then longtime love. He would joke at parties about being lucky enough to be loved by a genius, and everyone would laugh and think how sweet and secure he was. Looking back now, Simone could see the signs she had missed. How Jonathan always steered conversations toward business when they were with potential investors or clients. How he collected business cards at every networking event and followed up with people without telling her. How he had insisted on being present at every major business meeting, even when his input wasn't needed. "I just want to support you," he had said when she questioned his presence at a board meeting. "We're a team, right?" She had been so grateful to have someone who supported her dreams that she never questioned why he needed to be so involved in the technical details of her business. She never wondered why he asked so many questions about patent filings and intellectual property rights. She never thought it was strange that he knew the exact value of every investment and asset she owned. The red flags had been there for years, camouflaged by his perfect boyfriend behavior. The way he would bring up marriage only during her most successful periods, as if timing his romantic gestures to coincide with her financial wins. The way he had suggested they get matching key chains to each other's safety deposit boxes, as a symbol of trust. The way he always volunteered to handle their joint social media accounts and press inquiries. And the questions. So many innocent questions over the years. How exactly does the patent process work? What happens to intellectual property if something happens to you? Don't you think we should have some legal documents in place just in case? Shouldn't I be listed somewhere as a partner or beneficiary? Simone had thought he was being responsible and caring. She had thought he was worried about their future together. She had thought he was just naturally curious about her work because he loved her. The proposal had come last year, right after she closed a deal that valued her company at $400 million. Jonathan had arranged the perfect evening, their favorite restaurant, a string quartet, rose petals scattered on the table. He had gotten down on one knee and delivered a speech about how he had watched her conquer the world and wanted to spend the rest of his life supporting her dreams. "You are the most incredible woman I've ever known," he had said, tears in his eyes. "I want to be your partner in everything forever." The ring was stunning, a 3-carat diamond that must have cost 6 months of his salary. Later, she learned he had charged it to one of their joint credit cards, essentially making her pay for her own engagement ring. Another detail that seemed romantic at the time but felt sinister in hindsight. The wedding planning had been a year-long affair that Jonathan threw himself into with surprising enthusiasm. He handled all the vendor negotiations, managed the guest list, and coordinated with the wedding planner. At the time, Simone had been grateful that he was taking so much off her plate while she was dealing with a major product launch. Now she realized he had been positioning himself for maximum visibility and credibility. The wedding wasn't just a celebration of their love, it was Jonathan's public debut as Simone Carter's official partner, complete with hundreds of witnesses from the business world who would remember him as the devoted husband who had supported her rise to success. The honeymoon in Italy had been perfect. Too perfect. Jonathan had been attentive, romantic, and completely focused on her. He had taken hundreds of photos of them together, posted constantly on social media about their fairy tale love story, and made sure everyone knew they were blissfully happy newlyweds. All while his lawyers were preparing divorce papers. Simone closed her laptop and walked to the wall safe hidden behind their wedding portrait. Inside were all her important documents, patents, contracts, investment records, and business agreements. She pulled out a file folder she had never opened in Jonathan's presence, one that contained the detailed background check she had run on him before they moved in together 8 years ago. At the time, she had felt guilty about investigating the man she loved, but her lawyer had insisted it was just good business sense. The report had come back clean: no criminal history, good credit, steady employment, no red flags. But maybe she needed to look at it with different eyes now. As she flipped through the pages, details jumped out at her that she had dismissed years ago. Jonathan had changed jobs frequently in his 20s, always moving on just before projects were completed. He had dated several successful women before her, though none of the relationships had lasted more than 2 years. His financial profile showed someone who lived slightly above his means but was good at managing debt. Nothing criminal, but maybe something else. A pattern of opportunism. A talent for identifying successful people and positioning himself to benefit from their achievements. Simone's phone buzzed with another text from Jonathan. "I hope you understand this is just business. I'll always care about you as a person." She stared at the message, realizing that he was still playing his role even now. Still trying to maintain the fiction that he was the good guy in this situation, the caring ex-partner who was just looking out for his own interests. But Simone was done being manipulated. She had built her fortune by being smarter and more strategic than her competitors, and she was about to apply those same skills to destroying the man who thought he could steal her life's work. Jonathan had made one crucial mistake in his perfect plan. He had spent 15 years watching her build an empire, but he had never truly understood how she did it. He thought her success was just about being smart and working hard. He didn't realize that her greatest talent was seeing patterns that other people missed and thinking 10 steps ahead of everyone else. He was about to get a masterclass in strategic thinking from the woman he had underestimated for 15 years. Rebecca Walsh had been a private investigator for 12 years, and she had seen every kind of betrayal imaginable. Cheating spouses, embezzling business partners, insurance fraud, identity theft. She thought she had heard it all. But when Simone Carter walked into her office 2 days after receiving the divorce papers, Rebecca knew this case was going to be different. Simone sat across from Rebecca's desk with the controlled composure of someone who had built a business empire, but her eyes held the sharp focus of a predator. She wasn't a broken-hearted wife looking for evidence of an affair to gain sympathy in divorce court. She was a strategic thinker planning a counterattack. "I need to know everything," Simone said, sliding a thick folder across the desk. "Every person Jonathan has been in contact with, every financial transaction, every lie he's told. I need to understand exactly how long he's been planning this and who else is involved." Rebecca opened the folder to find meticulous documentation going back months. Bank statements, phone records, credit card bills, email printouts, photos, and even a timeline of suspicious behavior that Simone had apparently compiled in the past 48 hours. "This is very thorough," Rebecca said, impressed despite herself. "Most people don't have this level of detail about their own marriages. I built a $400 million company by paying attention to details other people miss," Simone replied. "I should have been applying that same attention to my personal life." Rebecca studied the documents. Joint credit cards showed unusual charges over the past 6 months, payments to law firms, document preparation services, and financial consulting companies. Phone records revealed numerous calls to numbers that Simone didn't recognize. Most interesting were the bank statements showing systematic transfers from their joint accounts to a personal account that only Jonathan controlled. "He's been moving money for months," Rebecca noted. "Small amounts, probably hoping you wouldn't notice. But it adds up to about $50,000. Retainer fees for lawyers and investigators," Simone said. "He's been building his case while pretending to plan our future together." Rebecca had worked enough divorce cases to recognize the pattern. This wasn't an impulsive decision. Someone has been coaching him on how to maximize his claim to your assets. "I need to know who." Over the next week, Rebecca deployed every tool in her investigative arsenal. She put surveillance on Jonathan, ran background checks on his recent contacts, and followed the money trail through his financial transactions. What she discovered was even more calculated than Simone had suspected. Jonathan wasn't working alone. For the past 18 months, he had been meeting regularly with a woman named Vanessa Sterling, a business consultant who specialized in partnership optimization, a fancy term for helping people extract maximum value from business relationships. Rebecca's surveillance photos showed Jonathan and Vanessa meeting at upscale restaurants, conference rooms, and eventually, a downtown apartment that Vanessa rented under a shell company. The relationship had clearly moved beyond professional consultation to personal involvement. "How long has the affair been going on?" Simone asked when Rebecca presented her findings. "Based on the evidence, at least 18 months. But it's not just about the affair. This woman has been orchestrating your husband's entire strategy." Rebecca spread surveillance photos across her desk. Jonathan and Vanessa walking hand in hand through a park. Kissing in the parking garage of her office building. Entering and leaving the secret apartment together. The timeline of their meetings corresponded perfectly with Jonathan's increased interest in Simone's business affairs. Vanessa Sterling runs a boutique consulting firm that primarily serves one type of client, Rebecca explained. People who want to claim a share of their partner's success. She helps them document their contributions, build legal cases, and maximize financial settlements. Simone studied Vanessa's photograph. She was beautiful in a conventional way, blonde, polished, the kind of woman who looked like she belonged in boardrooms and country clubs. Everything Simone was not. She coached him on what to say, how to act, and when to make his move, Rebecca continued. "Look at this timeline. Every major romantic gesture from Jonathan in the past 2 years corresponds with either a milestone in your business or a strategy session with Vanessa." The evidence was damning. Jonathan's proposal had come exactly 1 week after a meeting with Vanessa titled, "Timing Optimization for Maximum Legal Standing." The elaborate wedding had been planned to coincide with Simone's most profitable quarter, ensuring maximum asset values at the time of their legal union. Even their honeymoon photos had been strategically posted to establish their image as a devoted couple before the divorce bombshell. "She's done this before," Rebecca said, showing Simone a file of Vanessa's previous clients. "At least 6 other cases in the past 5 years where she helped someone claim a share of their partner's wealth. Her success rate is 90%. But as Rebecca dug deeper, she discovered something that made her blood run cold. Vanessa Sterling wasn't just running a consulting business, she was running a sophisticated con operation that targeted successful people through their romantic relationships. "Look at this pattern," Rebecca said, spreading out profiles of Vanessa's previous clients. She finds successful, wealthy individuals who are single or in unstable relationships. Then she introduces them to attractive, charming people who seem perfect for them. The marks fall in love, build relationships, and eventually face strategic divorces or breakups that leave them financially devastated. Simone stared at the photographs of Vanessa's previous victims. 2 tech entrepreneurs, a real estate mogul, a pharmaceutical executive, and an entertainment lawyer. All brilliant, successful people who had been manipulated into relationships with people they thought loved them. "You're saying Jonathan was planted in my life?" "Not necessarily," Rebecca hedged. "Your relationship predates Vanessa's business by several years. But I think she identified you as a target and recruited Jonathan to be her inside man. She probably approached him when your company started getting serious attention." The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Vanessa had studied Simone's weaknesses: her isolation in a male-dominated industry, her dedication to work that left little time for relationships, her gratitude for having someone who seemed to genuinely support her dreams. Then she had coached Jonathan on exactly how to exploit those vulnerabilities. "She turned him into the perfect boyfriend," Simone said quietly. Supportive but not clingy, interested in my work but not competitive, romantic but not overwhelming. Everything I thought I wanted in a partner. And now she's about to collect her fee, Rebecca said, showing Simone a contract she had uncovered through Vanessa's business accounts. 30% of whatever Jonathan gets in the divorce. With a $200 million claim, she stands to make $60 million. But Rebecca's investigation had also uncovered something else, something that would prove to be Vanessa Sterling's fatal mistake. She got greedy, Rebecca said, pulling up financial records on her laptop. Look at this. She's been embezzling from her own consulting clients, skimming money from their legal retainers and settlement funds. And she's been using insider information from their cases to make strategic investments in competing companies. The evidence showed a pattern of financial crimes spanning 3 years. Vanessa had been using her intimate knowledge of her clients' business vulnerabilities to profit from their downfall. She would help destroy their relationships and then bet against their companies in the stock market. She's not just a home wrecker, Rebecca said. She's a criminal. And she's been using Jonathan to gather intelligence about your company's operations, client relationships, and strategic plans. Simone felt something shift inside her chest. Not heartbreak anymore, but cold, calculating fury. Vanessa Sterling had turned her love story into a business transaction, but she had made one crucial error. She had chosen to target someone who was better at business than she was. I need everything you can find on her operation, Simone said. Financial records, client files, communication logs, surveillance footage. Everything. What are you planning to do? Simone gathered the photographs and documents, her mind already working through the possibilities. I'm going to destroy her business, expose her crimes, and make sure she never does this to anyone else. And I'm going to use Jonathan's own greed against him. Be careful, Rebecca warned. These people have been planning this for years. They know how to manipulate legal systems and public opinion. Simone smiled for the first time since receiving the divorce papers. It wasn't a warm smile. They've been planning for years, she agreed. But they made one mistake. They thought I was just another mark to be manipulated. They forgot that I didn't build a $400 million empire by being naive. I built it by being smarter, more ruthless, and more strategic than anyone who tried to compete with me. And now you're competing with them. No, Simone corrected. Now I'm going to teach them the difference between being clever and being brilliant. They wanted to play games with my life? Fine. But they're about to discover that I've been playing games at a level they can't even comprehend. As she left Rebecca's office, Simone was already planning her next moves. Vanessa Sterling and Jonathan had spent months preparing for war, but they had made the classic mistake of underestimating their enemy. They were about to learn that Simone Carter hadn't become one of the most successful entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley by playing fair. She had done it by playing smarter than everyone else. And she was about to play the most important game of her life. The forensic accountant Simone hired was a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chin who specialized in uncovering financial deception in high-stakes divorces. When Patricia spread out her preliminary findings across the conference table in Simone's lawyer's office, the scope of Jonathan's deception became clear. He's been preparing for this divorce for at least 3 years, Patricia announced, pointing to a complex flowchart of financial transactions. Maybe longer. This level of asset manipulation doesn't happen overnight. Simone studied the documents with the same intense focus she had once applied to debugging code. Jonathan had been systematically documenting every aspect of their shared life, building a case that portrayed him as an equal partner in her success rather than the supportive boyfriend he had always claimed to be. Look at these photographs, Patricia said, showing Simone a file of images that Jonathan's legal team had submitted as evidence. These are pictures of him at your office, at business meetings, at industry conferences. But they're all carefully staged to make it look like he was an integral part of your company's operations. The photos were infuriating in their calculated deception. Jonathan standing next to Simone during a presentation to investors, positioned to look like a co-presenter rather than moral support. Jonathan shaking hands with clients at company events, with angles that suggested he was closing deals rather than simply attending as her guest. Even casual photos from their home office had been cropped and edited to emphasize his presence during her work sessions. He's been building a visual narrative that he was your business partner, not just your romantic partner, Patricia continued. And he's got witnesses who will testify to his involvement in your company's decision-making process. Simone's lawyer, Robert Martinez, a veteran of Silicon Valley's most contentious divorces, looked grim as he reviewed the evidence. They're claiming that your company's success during your relationship was the result of joint effort and shared resources. They're arguing that Jonathan provided emotional support, business networking, marketing expertise, and strategic advice that directly contributed to your profits. That's insane, Simone said. I built my company through my own technical innovations and business acumen. Jonathan never contributed anything more than moral support. Unfortunately, proving that in court might be more difficult than you think, Robert warned. California's community property laws are complex, and they've clearly done their homework on how to exploit them. Patricia pulled up another document. They've also been creating evidence of shared financial responsibility. Look at these credit card statements. Over the past 3 years, Jonathan has been deliberately paying for business-related expenses using joint accounts, then keeping meticulous records to show he was financially contributing to your company's operations. The pattern was sickeningly clever. Jonathan had paid for client dinners, conference registrations, office supplies, and business travel using their shared credit cards. Individually, these expenses meant nothing, a supportive partner helping with practical matters. But compiled together with his carefully curated photo evidence, they painted a picture of someone who had been financially invested in Simone's business success. He's even got documentation showing that he took a lower-paying job 5 years ago specifically to be more available to support your career, Robert added. They're arguing that this represents a financial sacrifice that entitles him to compensation from your increased earnings during that period. Simone remembered that job change. Jonathan had claimed he wanted less stress and more work-life balance so they could spend more time together. She had been touched by his willingness to prioritize their relationship over his career advancement. Now she realized it had been a calculated move to establish legal grounds for claiming her income as compensation for his sacrifice. But Patricia had more disturbing news. They've also been manipulating the valuation of your assets. Look at these appraisal documents they've submitted. They're claiming your company is worth significantly more than current market assessments, and they're using inflated valuations for your real estate and investment portfolios. The numbers were staggering. While independent assessments valued Simone's total assets at around $300 million, Jonathan's legal team was claiming they were worth closer to $400 million, making his 50% claim worth $200 million instead of $150 million. How is that legal? Simone asked. It's not entirely legal, but it's not entirely illegal either, Robert explained. Asset valuation in divorce proceedings can be subjective, especially for privately held companies and unique intellectual property. They're using optimistic projections and favorable market comparisons to inflate the numbers. And they're counting potential future earnings from your patents and ongoing contracts as current assets, Patricia added. They're essentially claiming that Jonathan deserves half of money you haven't even made yet. But the most infuriating discovery was still to come. Patricia opened another file that made Simone's blood pressure spike. They've been recording your conversations, Patricia announced. Audio recordings, video files, even screenshots of your private text messages and emails. They've been building an evidence archive that goes back at least 2 years. The violation felt like a physical assault. Simone thought about every private conversation she had shared with Jonathan, every moment of vulnerability, every business strategy she had discussed while thinking she was safe in her own home with the person she trusted most. Some of these recordings appear to have been made without your knowledge, Robert said, reviewing the legal implications. But others were made during conversations where Jonathan was participating, which makes them potentially admissible depending on the circumstances. Patricia showed Simone a transcript of a conversation she had supposedly had with Jonathan 6 months earlier, discussing a potential merger with a competing tech company. According to the transcript, Simone had asked for Jonathan's advice and incorporated his suggestions into her final decision. "I never had this conversation," Simone said, reading the document with growing rage. "At least not the way they're describing it. I mentioned the merger possibility to Jonathan, but I never asked for his business advice or used his input in my decision-making. They've taken real conversations and edited them to support their narrative," Patricia explained. "A casual comment becomes a strategic consultation. A thank you for emotional support becomes acknowledgement of business partnership. It's sophisticated manipulation of the truth." But as disturbing as these discoveries were, they also revealed something important about Jonathan and Vanessa's strategy. They had been so focused on building their case for claiming Simone's wealth that they had created a comprehensive record of their own deception. "The good news is that this level of documentation cuts both ways," Robert noted. "If we can prove that they were systematically manipulating evidence and planning this divorce while pretending to be a loving marriage, it demonstrates fraud and bad faith that could invalidate their entire claim." Patricia nodded. And some of their evidence is so perfectly crafted that it actually proves premeditation. No one accidentally creates this comprehensive a case file unless they're planning something specific. Simone felt her strategic mind kicking into high gear. Jonathan and Vanessa had spent years building their trap, but they had also created the evidence she needed to expose their scheme. What about the hidden assets Rebecca discovered? She asked. The secret apartment, the payments to Vanessa's consulting company, the money Jonathan has been moving into private accounts? That's where things get interesting, Patricia said with a slight smile. While they were busy documenting your assets and manipulating valuations, they forgot to properly hide their own financial activities. Jonathan has been moving community property into accounts that he didn't disclose in his divorce filing. That's a serious legal violation. And Vanessa Sterling's consulting fees represent a conflict of interest that could invalidate Jonathan's entire legal case, Robert added. If we can prove that his affair with his legal strategist influenced his decision to seek divorce, it demonstrates bad faith that could result in him receiving nothing. For the first time since receiving the divorce papers, Simone felt something like hope. Jonathan and Vanessa had been so confident in their scheme that they had gotten sloppy. They had created evidence of their own wrongdoing while trying to steal her life's work. So what's our strategy? She asked. Robert leaned forward, his expression turning predatory. We're going to let them present their case first. Let them commit to their story in court filings and depositions. Let them stake their credibility on all these manipulated documents and fabricated evidence. And then we're going to systematically destroy every piece of their argument while exposing their fraud, Patricia continued. We're going to show that Jonathan wasn't a business partner, he was a con artist. And Vanessa Sterling wasn't a consultant, she was his co-conspirator in a criminal enterprise. Simone gathered the documents, her mind already working through the possibilities. Jonathan thought he had spent 3 years preparing for war, but he had actually spent 3 years giving her the ammunition she needed to destroy him. There's one more thing we need to consider, Robert said. This kind of evidence manipulation and systematic deception might be criminal, not just civil violations. If we play this right, Jonathan and Vanessa could face charges for fraud, conspiracy, and maybe even extortion. Good, Simone said quietly. I want them to face every possible consequence for what they've done. They didn't just try to steal my money, they stole 15 years of my life by turning my love into their business plan. As she left the lawyer's office, Simone realized that Jonathan had made a fundamental miscalculation. He had spent so much time learning how to exploit her emotional vulnerabilities that he had forgotten she was also one of the most strategically brilliant business minds in Silicon Valley. He was about to get a reminder of exactly who he had chosen to cross. Vanessa Sterling's office occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city below. Everything about the space was designed to project success and authority from the Italian marble. Floors to the custom-made conference table that cost more than most people's cars. But Rebecca Walsh had been watching the building for 3 days, and she knew that Vanessa's impressive facade was built on a foundation of calculated deception and criminal enterprise. Through careful surveillance and financial investigation, Rebecca had uncovered the true scope of Vanessa's operation. It wasn't just about helping people claim assets in relationship disputes, it was a sophisticated criminal network that targeted wealthy individuals through carefully orchestrated romantic manipulation. The evidence was spread across Rebecca's desk like pieces of a complex puzzle. Phone records showing Vanessa's communications with a network of attractive men and women who worked as romantic operatives. Financial records revealing payments to private investigators, social media specialists, and even acting coaches who helped train her operatives to become irresistible to their specific targets. She's been running this con for 7 years, Rebecca explained to Simone during their latest meeting. She calls it relationship optimization, but it's actually organized fraud on a massive scale. Rebecca showed Simone a file containing profiles of Vanessa's previous victims. Each case followed the same pattern. Identify a wealthy, successful person with emotional vulnerabilities, deploy a perfectly tailored romantic partner to exploit those vulnerabilities, build a relationship that positioned the operative to claim assets, then execute a strategic breakup or divorce that left the victim financially devastated. Look at this victim, Rebecca said, pointing to a file labeled Target 7, Rachel Morrison. Tech executive, built a social media company worth $200 million. Vanessa introduced her to a charming musician named Anthony who seemed to support her career while secretly documenting every aspect of her business operations. The divorce settlement cost Rachel $80 million. The pattern was sickeningly familiar. Each victim had been isolated, successful, and hungry for genuine emotional connection. Each operative had been carefully selected and trained to be exactly what their target needed: supportive but not clingy, interested but not threatening, romantic but not overwhelming. Jonathan wasn't her first male operative, Rebecca continued, but he was probably her most successful. Most of her previous cons targeted women, but Jonathan's case represented her biggest potential payout. Simone studied Jonathan's file in the context of Vanessa's other operations. His approach had been more sophisticated than the others, probably because he had genuinely cared for Simone initially before Vanessa corrupted his motivations with greed and manipulation. When did she recruit him? Simone asked. Based on the financial records, their first contact was about 4 years ago, Rebecca replied. Right around the time your company started getting serious venture capital attention. I think she identified you as a target and approached Jonathan with a business proposition. Rebecca showed Simone a series of bank records that told the story of Jonathan's corruption. 4 years ago, he had been living modestly on his marketing consultant salary, with normal spending patterns and reasonable debt levels. But then mysterious deposits started appearing in his personal accounts, small amounts at first, then larger payments as his relationship with Vanessa developed. She was paying him to report on your business activities, Rebecca explained. Look at these payment dates. They correspond exactly with major developments in your company: new patents, client acquisitions, investment rounds, strategic partnerships. Jonathan was selling information about your operations to Vanessa, who was using it to plan the perfect timing for their con. The betrayal cut deeper than Simone had imagined possible. Not only had Jonathan been planning to divorce her, he had been spying on her business for years, feeding confidential information to a criminal who was planning to destroy her life. What was Vanessa doing with the information? Simone asked. Rebecca pulled up another set of documents that made Simone's stomach turn. She was trading on it, using insider knowledge about your company's plans to make strategic investments in competing firms. When she knew you were developing new technology, she would invest in companies that might benefit from or compete with your innovations. The evidence showed a pattern of sophisticated insider trading that had netted Vanessa millions of dollars over the past 3 years. She hadn't just been planning to steal Simone's money through the divorce, she had been profiting from confidential business intelligence that Jonathan provided. She's also been using the information to sabotage your business relationships, Rebecca added. Look at these communication logs. She's been reaching out to your clients and investors, planting subtle doubts about your company's stability and future prospects. Simone recognized several instances where potential deals had fallen through unexpectedly, where investors had suddenly become reluctant, where clients had expressed concerns about her company's long-term viability. She had attributed these setbacks to normal business competition, never realizing that someone was actively working to undermine her success. She's been systematically weakening your business position to make her con more effective, Rebecca explained. If your company's value decreases, you become more financially vulnerable and more likely to settle the divorce quickly to avoid further losses. But as Rebecca dug deeper into Vanessa's operation, she discovered something that would prove to be the criminal's fatal flaw. Vanessa had become so successful at her cons that she had gotten arrogant and sloppy. She's been keeping detailed records of everything, Rebecca said, showing Simone photographs of files from Vanessa's office safe. Client profiles, operative training materials, financial records, even recordings of strategy sessions with her operatives. She's documented her entire criminal enterprise. The files were a prosecutor's dream. Detailed plans for manipulating victims, training manuals for operatives, financial records showing the distribution of stolen assets, and even performance evaluations rating her operatives' effectiveness at emotional manipulation. Why would she keep all this evidence? Simone asked. Ego and insurance, Rebecca replied. She's proud of what she's built and she wants to document her success. But she's also paranoid about her operatives betraying her, so she keeps evidence that could destroy them if they ever tried to expose her operation. One file in particular caught Simone's attention. It was labeled Operation Goldmine and contained a detailed analysis of Simone's psychological profile, business operations, and personal vulnerabilities. They studied me like a lab rat, Simone said, reading through pages of psychological analysis that cataloged her fears, insecurities, and emotional needs. They knew exactly which buttons to push and when to push them. The file contained strategies for exploiting Simone's work-focused lifestyle, her gratitude for emotional support, and her tendency to trust people who seemed genuinely interested in her success. It even included analysis of her public interviews and social media posts to identify the qualities she valued most in romantic partners. Jonathan was following a script, Rebecca explained. Every romantic gesture, every supportive comment, every moment of apparent spontaneity was carefully planned to manipulate your emotions and build your dependence on him. But the most damaging evidence was yet to come. Rebecca showed Simone a series of recorded conversations between Vanessa and Jonathan, planning the final stages of their con. "Listen to this," Rebecca said, playing an audio file on her laptop. Vanessa's voice was cold and calculating as she discussed Simone like a business transaction. "The target is completely dependent on emotional validation from the operative. She has no close friends outside of work and no family support system. The operative has successfully positioned himself as her primary source of emotional security." Jonathan's voice responded with casual cruelty. "She trusts me completely. She shares everything about her business operations and never questions my interest in the technical details. The financial documentation is more comprehensive than we expected." "Perfect," Vanessa replied. "The timing is optimal. Her company valuation has peaked, and she's emotionally committed to the marriage narrative. The operative should proceed with the proposal immediately, followed by wedding planning that maximizes public visibility and legal standing." Hearing the man she had loved for 15 years discuss her like a mark in a con game was devastating, but it also crystallized Simone's resolve. These people had turned her life into their business plan, but they had made one critical error: they had underestimated her ability to think strategically under pressure. "There's more," Rebecca said. "They've been planning to destroy you even after they get their money. Listen to this conversation from last month." The audio file revealed Vanessa and Jonathan discussing their post-divorce strategy. They planned to sell their story to business media, portraying Simone as a demanding, manipulative partner who had taken credit for work that Jonathan had contributed to. They wanted to damage her professional reputation to prevent her from rebuilding her wealth and potentially coming after them legally. "She'll be too humiliated and financially devastated to fight back," Vanessa had said. "The public narrative will be that she was successful because of her partner's support, and without him she'll be exposed as a fraud. And I'll be positioned as the supportive partner who was taken advantage of by a ruthless businesswoman," Jonathan had added. "The media loves that story, the brilliant woman who succeeds by exploiting the men who love her." Simone turned off the recording, her hands shaking with rage. They hadn't just planned to steal her money, they had planned to destroy her reputation, her business relationships, and her ability to rebuild her life. "Do we have enough evidence to stop them?" she asked. Rebecca smiled grimly. "We have enough evidence to destroy them. But we need to be strategic about how we use it. If we reveal everything too early, they might flee or destroy evidence. We need to let them commit fully to their plan before we expose them. What do you recommend? Let them file their divorce case and present their evidence in court. Let them commit perjury by lying under oath about their relationship and financial arrangements. Let them establish a legal record of their false claims. And then we systematically destroy every aspect of their case while exposing their criminal operation to federal authorities. We don't just win the divorce case, we send them both to prison for fraud, conspiracy, and organized crime." Simone gathered the evidence files, her strategic mind already working through the possibilities. Vanessa Sterling and Jonathan had spent years planning her destruction, but they had created the very evidence she needed to destroy them instead. "There's one thing I want to do first," Simone said. "I want to warn their other victims. If Vanessa has been running cons for 7 years, there might be people who don't even realize they were manipulated. They deserve to know the truth." Rebecca nodded approvingly. "That's risky. It might alert Vanessa that we're onto her operation." "Good," Simone said. "I want her to know that her victims are fighting back. I want her to feel the same fear and helplessness that she's inflicted on other people." As she left Rebecca's office, Simone realized that she was no longer just fighting for her own money and reputation. She was fighting for every person who had been victimized by Vanessa's criminal enterprise. She was going to make sure that no one else ever had their love turned into a weapon against them. Vanessa Sterling had built her success by exploiting other people's capacity for love and trust. But she was about to learn that she had chosen the wrong victim for her final con. Simone Carter hadn't built a tech empire by being naive about human nature. She had built it by being more strategic, more determined, and more ruthless than anyone who tried to compete with her. And now she was competing for everything that mattered to her. Simone's war room was her home office, transformed overnight into a command center that would have impressed any military strategist. 3 large monitors displayed financial data, legal documents, and surveillance footage. White boards covered every wall, filled with timelines, connection diagrams, and strategic battle plans written in her precise handwriting. She had assembled a team of the best professionals money could hire. Robert Martinez handling legal strategy, Patricia Chin managing forensic accounting, Rebecca Walsh coordinating investigation and surveillance, and now Dr. Angela Torres, a forensic psychologist who specialized in exposing manipulation and fraud in high-stakes legal cases. They made a fundamental error in their psychological assessment, Dr. Torres explained, reviewing Vanessa's analysis of Simone's personality profile. They assumed that your work-focused lifestyle and gratitude for emotional support made you weak and dependent. They completely missed your capacity for strategic thinking under extreme pressure. Simone studied her own psychological profile as written by her enemies. It was accurate in many details but wrong in its crucial conclusion. Yes, she valued emotional support and had limited experience with romantic relationships. But she had also survived and thrived in one of the most competitive business environments in the world by being tougher and smarter than people who underestimated her. What's their biggest vulnerability? Simone asked. Arrogance, Dr. Torres replied immediately. They're so confident in their manipulation techniques that they can't imagine anyone seeing through their deception. Look at how carelessly they documented their crimes. They never considered that their victims might be intelligent enough to fight back effectively. The first phase of Simone's counterattack had already begun. While Jonathan's lawyers were preparing their case for the divorce proceedings, Simone's team was systematically dismantling the foundation of their claims. Patricia had discovered discrepancies in every financial document that Jonathan's team had submitted. Bank records that didn't match their stated transactions. Credit card statements that had been selectively edited to exclude purchases that contradicted their narrative. Investment valuations that used outdated or manipulated market data. Their case is built on fraudulent evidence, Patricia reported during their morning strategy session. But the fraud is sophisticated enough that it might not be immediately obvious to a judge who isn't looking for it. That's why we're going to make sure the judge is looking for it, Robert added. We're going to present our evidence in a way that forces them to defend every document, every claim, every assertion. We're going to make them commit to their lies under oath. Meanwhile, Rebecca had been expanding her investigation into Vanessa's network of operatives and victims. What she discovered was even more extensive than they had initially realized. She's been running multiple cons simultaneously, Rebecca reported. I've identified at least 12 active cases where her operatives are currently manipulating targets. And there are probably more victims from previous years who never realized they were conned. Simone felt a surge of determination that went beyond her personal desire for revenge. These people were professional predators who destroyed lives for profit. Stopping them wasn't just about protecting her own assets, it was about preventing them from victimizing anyone else. I want to contact every victim we can identify, she decided. They deserve to know the truth about what happened to them, and we might need their testimony to establish the pattern of criminal behavior. Dr. Torres looked concerned. That's risky. Some of them might not want to relive their trauma or get involved in legal proceedings. And contacting them might alert Vanessa that we're building a case against her entire operation. I'm willing to take that risk, Simone said. These people had their lives destroyed by professional con artists. They deserve justice, and we need their stories to show that this wasn't just a relationship gone bad, it was organized crime. The victim outreach began carefully. Rebecca and Dr. Torres contacted former targets through intermediaries, offering support and information without revealing the full scope of their investigation. The response was both heartbreaking and encouraging. Rachel Morrison, the social media executive who had lost $80 million to one of Vanessa's cons, broke down crying when she learned that her relationship had been a calculated deception. I thought I was going crazy, she told Dr. Torres during a video call. Anthony seemed so perfect for me, so understanding of my work pressures and supportive of my dreams. When he suddenly became demanding and manipulative during the divorce, I couldn't understand what had changed. I blamed myself for being a bad judge of character. Her story was identical to Simone's experience in all the crucial details. The perfectly timed romantic gestures, the gradual insertion into business activities, the systematic documentation of contributions that had seemed natural at the time but revealed themselves as calculated in hindsight. I still have nightmares about the divorce proceedings, Rachel continued. Anthony's lawyers made me feel like I was a selfish monster who had used him for emotional support and then discarded him when he tried to claim what he deserved. I almost believed them. Similar stories emerged from other victims. A real estate mogul who had lost $40 million to a woman who seemed to share his passion for architecture and design. A pharmaceutical executive whose husband had claimed credit for supporting her through medical school and early career struggles. An entertainment lawyer whose wife had documented 15 years of career sacrifices to support his success. Each victim had been isolated, successful, and vulnerable to someone who seemed to genuinely understand and support their ambitions. Each had been systematically manipulated by operatives who had been trained to exploit their specific psychological needs. And each had been left emotionally and financially devastated by partners they had trusted completely. The pattern is undeniable, Dr. Torres concluded. This is organized crime disguised as relationship counseling. Vanessa Sterling has been running a criminal enterprise that targets successful people through romantic manipulation. But as they gathered victim testimony and evidence, Jonathan's legal team was preparing their own offensive strategy. They filed motions demanding immediate access to Simone's financial records, business documents, and personal communications. They scheduled depositions with her business partners, employees, and anyone who could testify about Jonathan's involvement in her company's operations. They're trying to overwhelm us with legal procedures while establishing their narrative early, Robert warned. They want to control the story before we have a chance to present our evidence. Simone was ready for their attack. Let them dig into my records. Everything they'll find will support my version of events. My business success is documented, legitimate, and entirely the result of my own work. The first major confrontation came during Jonathan's deposition, where he would be required to testify under oath about his claims regarding Simone's business. Simone attended the session, sitting across from the man she had loved for 15 years as he calmly lied about their relationship. I provided strategic guidance on all major business decisions, Jonathan testified, maintaining eye contact with his lawyers while avoiding Simone's gaze. I helped develop marketing strategies, facilitated client relationships, and provided emotional support that was essential to Ms. Carter's ability to focus on technical development. Can you provide specific examples of strategic guidance you provided? Robert asked during cross-examination. Jonathan was prepared with carefully rehearsed responses. He described conversations about market positioning, client acquisition strategies, and product development decisions. But as Robert pressed for details, inconsistencies began to emerge in his testimony. You mentioned advising Ms. Carter on the development of her cloud computing algorithm, Robert said. Can you explain the technical specifications you recommended? Jonathan's confidence wavered slightly. I focused more on the business applications than the technical details. My expertise was in marketing and strategic positioning. So you had no input on the actual technology that formed the foundation of Ms. Carter's success? I provided context about market needs and customer requirements that influenced the technical development process. Robert smiled slightly. And this market analysis you provided, do you have any documentation of your research or recommendations? Most of our strategic discussions were informal conversations. I didn't always document my contributions. How convenient, Robert said quietly, making notes that suggested Jonathan's lack of documentation was suspicious rather than normal. The deposition continued for 6 hours, with Robert systematically exposing the weaknesses in Jonathan's claims. When pressed for specific examples, documentation, or technical knowledge, Jonathan's testimony became vague and contradictory. When confronted with evidence of his secret meetings with Vanessa, his explanations became increasingly implausible. You maintained a secret apartment with Miss Sterling for 18 months while married to Miss Carter, Robert stated. Can you explain the nature of that relationship? Vanessa was providing professional consulting services regarding my legal rights in the relationship, Jonathan replied, his composure finally cracking. The apartment was a neutral location for confidential discussions. Confidential discussions that required you to spend nights there regularly? Sometimes our strategy sessions ran late. And the intimate photographs taken at that location, were those part of your legal strategy sessions? Jonathan's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. His attempt to explain away the affair had made him look dishonest and manipulative. As they left the deposition, Simone felt a grim satisfaction. Jonathan had committed himself to a story that her team could systematically dismantle. He had lied under oath about his contributions to her business, his relationship with Vanessa, and his motives for seeking divorce. He's trapped now, Robert explained as they walked to their car. Everything he said today can be contradicted with evidence. When we show that his testimony was false, it will invalidate his entire case. But Simone knew that exposing Jonathan's lies was only the beginning. The real target was Vanessa Sterling and her criminal operation. Jonathan was just a tool that Vanessa had used to execute her con. Taking him down wouldn't prevent her from victimizing other people. "When do we go after Vanessa directly?" she asked. "Soon," Robert replied. "We need to let Jonathan's case proceed far enough that she's fully committed to defending it. Once she files supporting documents and provides testimony backing up his claims, she becomes legally liable for the fraud as a co-conspirator. And then we destroy them both." "Then we destroy them both," Robert confirmed. "But we do it so thoroughly that they never have the opportunity to hurt anyone else." As Simone drove home through the city where she had built her empire, she felt something she hadn't experienced since receiving the divorce papers: confidence. Jonathan and Vanessa had spent years planning their perfect con, but they had made the fatal mistake of targeting someone who was better at strategic warfare than they were. They had thought they were playing chess while she was playing checkers. But they were about to discover that she had been playing chess at a level they couldn't even comprehend. The war for her life's work was just beginning, but Simone Carter was ready to remind everyone why she had become one of the most successful entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. She hadn't built her empire by being lucky or naive. She had built it by being smarter, tougher, and more determined than anyone who tried to compete with her. And she was about to compete for everything that mattered to her. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While Simone's team was focused on exposing Vanessa's criminal operation and Jonathan's fraudulent claims, a former employee of Jonathan's marketing consulting firm reached out to Rebecca with information that changed everything. Tyler Brooks had worked as a junior analyst at Jonathan's company 3 years earlier, before being laid off during what Jonathan claimed were budget cuts. But Tyler had kept copies of files that revealed the real reason for his termination. He had discovered Jonathan's illegal activities and threatened to report them. Jonathan wasn't just providing business intelligence to Vanessa, Tyler explained during a clandestine meeting at a coffee shop downtown. He was actively sabotaging his own clients to benefit her investment schemes. Tyler spread out copies of internal company documents that showed a pattern of professional misconduct spanning several years. Jonathan had been using his position as a marketing consultant to gather confidential information about his clients' business strategies, then sharing that intelligence with Vanessa so she could make strategic investments that would benefit from their failures. "Look at this client," Tyler said, pointing to a file labeled Meridian Software Solutions. Jonathan was hired to develop their market expansion strategy. But instead of helping them succeed, he deliberately provided bad advice that caused their product launch to fail. Meanwhile, Vanessa invested heavily in their main competitor right before the launch. The evidence was damning. Jonathan had been systematically betraying his professional responsibilities while maintaining the facade of a successful marketing consultant. His clients had been paying him to help their businesses succeed while he was actively working to ensure their failure. This is how he could afford to maintain the lifestyle that impressed Simone, Rebecca realized. He wasn't living modestly on a consultant's salary, he was earning millions from Vanessa's insider trading schemes. Tyler nodded grimly. And it gets worse. He wasn't just targeting random clients. He was specifically seeking out contracts with companies that competed with businesses where Vanessa had investments. He was using his professional access to wage economic warfare. Patricia Chin immediately recognized the implications when Rebecca brought her Tyler's evidence. "This establishes a pattern of criminal conspiracy that goes far beyond the divorce fraud," she explained to Simone. "Jonathan and Vanessa have been running an organized crime operation that manipulates markets through professional sabotage." The financial records Tyler provided showed payments from shell companies controlled by Vanessa totaling over $3 million during the past 3 years. Jonathan's apparent sacrifice of career advancement to support Simone hadn't been romantic devotion, it had been a cover story for his real source of income as a professional saboteur. He never needed to advance in his legitimate career because he was making more money from criminal activities, Simone realized. His willingness to prioritize our relationship over his job wasn't love, it was a business calculation. But Tyler's revelations also provided crucial evidence for dismantling Jonathan's divorce claims. If his income during their relationship had come primarily from criminal activities rather than legitimate work, then his assertions about financial sacrifice and reduced earning potential were completely fraudulent. "This changes our entire legal strategy," Robert Martinez explained during an emergency team meeting. "We're not just defending against divorce fraud anymore, we're exposing organized crime. Jonathan's claims about supporting Simone's career while sacrificing his own are lies. He was earning millions through criminal activities that he hid from her. Dr. Torres reviewed Tyler's evidence from a psychological perspective and found patterns that supported their broader case against Vanessa's operation. Jonathan's client sabotage follows the same systematic approach as his romantic manipulation, she noted. He identifies targets, builds trust, gathers intelligence, then executes betrayal for financial gain. It's the same criminal mindset applied to both professional and personal relationships. The evidence also revealed how Jonathan had been preparing for the divorce much longer than they had initially realized. Some of his client's sabotage activities had been specifically designed to establish false documentation of his business acumen and strategic thinking abilities. "Look at these emails," Patricia said, showing Simone correspondence between Jonathan and his clients. He was creating a paper trail that made it appear he was providing valuable strategic advice, even while his actual recommendations were designed to cause failure. He knew he would need evidence of business expertise to support his divorce claims. Tyler's information also led Rebecca to discover additional criminal activities that Vanessa had been coordinating through her network of operatives. Financial records showed payments to professional hackers who had been stealing confidential business information from companies targeted by her investment schemes. "She's been running a sophisticated corporate espionage operation," Rebecca reported. Her romantic operatives weren't just gathering intelligence from their targets, they were also facilitating illegal access to their company's confidential data. The scope of Vanessa's criminal enterprise was staggering. She had been manipulating stock prices, sabotaging business deals, stealing intellectual property, and destroying people's personal lives to generate profits for her investment portfolio. The divorce cons were just one element of a much larger criminal organization. "We need to involve federal authorities," Robert advised. "This level of organized crime requires law enforcement intervention. We can't handle this through civil litigation alone." But Simone wanted to maintain control over the timing and presentation of evidence. "We coordinate with law enforcement, but we don't let them take over our case. I want to make sure Jonathan and Vanessa face consequences for what they did to me personally, not just their criminal enterprise." The team developed a coordinated strategy that would expose the criminal operation while ensuring maximum consequences for both Jonathan and Vanessa. They would present evidence to federal prosecutors while simultaneously using it to destroy Jonathan's divorce case and pursue civil litigation for damages. "We're going to hit them from every possible angle," Robert explained. "Criminal charges, civil fraud claims, divorce court defense, and regulatory violations. They won't be able to mount an effective defense when they're fighting battles on multiple fronts simultaneously." Meanwhile, Jonathan and Vanessa remained confident in their original plan. They had no idea that their carefully constructed deception was being systematically dismantled by evidence of their own criminal activities. Jonathan's lawyers filed additional motions demanding accelerated proceedings and immediate asset distribution. They were trying to pressure Simone into a quick settlement before her defense could be fully prepared. "They're getting nervous," Dr. Torres observed. "The aggressive legal tactics suggest they're worried about their ability to sustain their deception under prolonged scrutiny. But their aggressive tactics were actually helping Simone's case. Each motion, each demand, each public statement committed them further to their fraudulent narrative. They were making it impossible to claim later that their assertions had been misunderstandings or exaggerations." The most damaging evidence came when Rebecca discovered that Vanessa and Jonathan had been planning to flee the country immediately after securing the divorce settlement. Financial records showed they had been moving money to offshore accounts and researching countries without extradition treaties with the United States. "They never intended to stay and enjoy their stolen wealth," Rebecca explained. "They were planning to disappear as soon as they got Simone's money, leaving her financially devastated and unable to pursue them legally. The flight risk evidence provided grounds for freezing their assets and preventing them from leaving the jurisdiction. Robert filed emergency motions that would trap them in the legal system while their criminal activities were fully exposed. Now they can't run, he explained to Simone. They're committed to seeing this through to the end, which means they'll be here when federal authorities are ready to arrest them. As the evidence mounted, Simone felt her confidence growing. Jonathan and Vanessa had spent years planning what they thought was the perfect crime, but their arrogance and greed had led them to create a comprehensive record of their own criminal activities. They documented everything because they thought they were untouchable, she realized. They never imagined that their victims would be capable of fighting back effectively. Tyler's evidence had provided the missing piece of the puzzle. Jonathan wasn't just a manipulative ex-husband trying to steal her assets, he was a professional criminal who had been betraying people for years. Vanessa wasn't just a home wrecker with a consulting business, she was the leader of an organized crime syndicate. When do we strike? Simone asked her team. Soon, Robert replied. We let them present their case in court first. Let them commit fully to their lies under oath. Let them establish a legal record of perjury and fraud. And then we destroy them so completely that they never have the opportunity to hurt anyone else, Patricia added. Simone gathered the evidence files, her strategic mind already anticipating their final moves. Jonathan and Vanessa had taught her a valuable lesson about the difference between being clever and being brilliant. They had been clever enough to manipulate her emotions and exploit her vulnerabilities. But they hadn't been brilliant enough to understand that attacking someone's capacity for love would ultimately unleash their capacity for strategic warfare. They were about to learn that Simone Carter hadn't become one of the most successful entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley by being naive about human nature. She had done it by being more strategic, more determined, and more ruthless than anyone who tried to compete with her. And in the most important competition of her life, she was about to remind everyone why she always won. The courtroom was packed with media representatives, business associates, and legal observers who had come to witness what everyone expected to be Silicon Valley's most dramatic divorce case. Jonathan sat confidently at the plaintiff's table with his team of expensive lawyers, while Vanessa Sterling occupied a seat in the gallery, positioned to provide strategic support for their carefully orchestrated case. They had no idea they were about to walk into a trap that had been 3 months in the making. Judge Patricia Hernandez called the proceedings to order, and Jonathan's lead attorney, Michael Chin, began presenting their case with the polished confidence of someone who believed he held all the winning cards. Your Honor, this case represents one of the most significant partnership disputes in recent Silicon Valley history, Chin announced. My client, Jonathan Rivers, devoted 15 years of his life to supporting and building the business empire that Ms. Carter now claims as solely her own achievement. Chin's opening statement painted Jonathan as the devoted partner who had sacrificed his own career ambitions to support Simone's success, only to be cast aside when she no longer needed his contributions. The narrative was compelling, supported by carefully selected evidence that portrayed their relationship as a business partnership disguised as romance. The evidence will show that Mr. Rivers provided strategic guidance, marketing expertise, client relationship management, and emotional support that was essential to Ms. Carter's success, Chin continued. Without his contributions, her company would never have achieved its current valuation of $400 million. Simone watched Jonathan during his lawyer's presentation, studying the man she had loved for 15 years as he prepared to commit perjury on a massive scale. He looked calm and confident, occasionally nodding at particularly effective points in his attorney's argument. He had no idea that every word his lawyer spoke was being systematically documented for use in federal criminal proceedings that would begin immediately after the divorce case concluded. When it came time for Jonathan to testify, he took the witness stand with the composed demeanor of someone who had rehearsed his performance extensively. His testimony was smooth, detailed, and completely fabricated. I provided strategic guidance on all major business decisions, Jonathan testified under oath. I helped develop marketing strategies that directly contributed to client acquisition and revenue growth. My advice on patent applications and intellectual property protection was instrumental in securing Ms. Carter's competitive advantages. Can you provide specific examples of your strategic contributions? Chin asked, leading Jonathan through a carefully scripted recitation of false claims. Jonathan described fictional strategy sessions where he had supposedly provided crucial business insights. He claimed credit for marketing campaigns that had actually been developed by Simone's professional marketing team. He asserted that his networking efforts had secured major client contracts that Simone had actually won through technical excellence and competitive pricing. Each false statement was being recorded and would be contradicted by documentary evidence during Simone's defense. But Robert Martinez let Jonathan continue lying, allowing him to commit multiple counts of perjury while establishing the fraudulent foundation of his claims. Mr. Rivers, can you explain the nature of your relationship with Vanessa Sterling? Robert asked during cross-examination. Jonathan's composure wavered slightly, but he stuck to his prepared script. Ms. Sterling provided professional consulting services regarding my legal rights and options. Our relationship was strictly professional. Strictly professional relationships typically don't involve shared apartments and intimate personal photographs, Robert observed, showing the court surveillance images that Rebecca had gathered. Ms. Sterling and I developed a personal relationship after she began providing consulting services, Jonathan admitted reluctantly. But that relationship didn't begin until after I had already made the decision to seek divorce based on the breakdown of my marriage to Miss Carter. It was a carefully crafted lie designed to make his affair seem like a consequence of marital problems rather than the cause of his divorce plans. But Robert had evidence that would prove Jonathan had been involved with Vanessa for over 2 years while actively planning the divorce fraud. When Vanessa took the stand to provide supporting testimony, she presented herself as a professional consultant who had been hired to help Jonathan understand his legal rights in a complex relationship dissolution. Mr. Rivers came to me because he was concerned that his contributions to Miss Carter's success were not being recognized or valued, Vanessa testified. My role was to help him document his involvement in her business operations and understand his legal options for protecting his interests. Vanessa's testimony was polished and professional, carefully avoiding any details that might expose her criminal operation. She portrayed herself as a legitimate consultant who had simply provided advice to a client who felt his partnership contributions were being undervalued. But Robert had been waiting for this moment. When it came time for cross-examination, he approached Vanessa with the predatory focus of someone who had been preparing for this confrontation for months. Miss Sterling, how many clients have you represented in similar relationship dissolution cases? Robert asked. I've provided consulting services to approximately 20 clients over the past 7 years, Vanessa replied carefully. And what was the average financial settlement achieved for those clients? Vanessa's lawyer objected, but Judge Hernandez allowed the question. Settlements varied depending on the specific circumstances of each case. Would it be fair to say that your clients typically received millions of dollars in settlements from their former partners? Some cases involved significant financial distributions, yes. Robert smiled slightly. And what percentage of those settlements did you receive as compensation for your consulting services? The question hit its target perfectly. Vanessa hesitated, realizing that any answer would reveal the commercial nature of her operation. If she claimed low fees, it would seem implausible that she could afford her expensive lifestyle. If she admitted to high fees, it would suggest that her consulting was more like partnership in fraud. My fee structure varies depending on the complexity of each case, she said evasively. Is it true that you typically receive 30% of any settlement your clients achieve? I sometimes work on a contingency basis when clients have limited resources to pay consulting fees up front. So your income depends directly on maximizing the financial settlements your clients receive from their former partners? Vanessa's lawyer objected again, but the damage was done. Robert had established that Vanessa had a direct financial interest in maximizing Jonathan's divorce settlement, which contradicted her portrayal of herself as an objective professional consultant. Miss Sterling, are you familiar with the term criminal conspiracy? Robert asked. Objection. Vanessa's lawyer shouted. Sustained, Judge Hernandez ruled, but the question had planted doubt about Vanessa's true role in the case. Robert then began presenting evidence that systematically destroyed every aspect of Jonathan and Vanessa's case. Financial records showed that Jonathan's claimed contributions to Simone's business were either non-existent or grossly exaggerated. Security footage from Simone's office building proved that Jonathan had never attended the strategy meetings he claimed to have participated in. Email records showed that his supposed marketing contributions had actually been handled by professional consultants hired by Simone's company. The evidence shows that Mr. Rivers had no meaningful involvement in the technical development, strategic planning, or operational management of Miss Carter's business, Robert argued. His claims of partnership and contribution are fabricated to support a fraudulent attempt to claim assets he has no legal right to. But the most devastating evidence was yet to come. Robert presented Tyler Brooks's documentation of Jonathan's criminal activities, showing that his income during the relationship had come primarily from professional sabotage and insider trading rather than legitimate consulting work. Mr. Rivers wasn't sacrificing his career to support Miss Carter, Robert announced. He was earning millions of dollars through criminal activities that he concealed from her. His claims of financial sacrifice are completely false. The courtroom erupted as the implications became clear. Jonathan hadn't been a supportive partner who deserved compensation for his contributions, he had been a criminal who had been deceiving Simone about the source of his income while planning to steal her legitimate wealth. Judge Hernandez called for order, but the damage to Jonathan's credibility was catastrophic. Every aspect of his testimony had been revealed as perjury, and his claims of partnership had been exposed as part of an elaborate fraud scheme. Furthermore, Robert continued, the evidence shows that Mr. Rivers and Ms. Sterling have been conducting an organized criminal enterprise that targets successful individuals through romantic manipulation. This divorce case represents just one element of a broader pattern of fraud and conspiracy. Robert presented evidence of Vanessa's previous victims, showing the systematic pattern of romantic manipulation and financial exploitation that had been repeated across multiple cases. Bank records proved that Vanessa and Jonathan had been coordinating their activities for over 2 years, with Vanessa providing strategic guidance while Jonathan gathered intelligence and positioned himself for maximum financial gain. This is not a relationship dispute, Robert concluded. This is organized crime disguised as a divorce case. Mr. Rivers and Ms. Sterling have been running a criminal conspiracy to defraud Ms. Carter of her legitimate assets through systematic deception and manipulation. The prosecution phase of the case took 3 days, during which Robert methodically destroyed every element of Jonathan's claims while exposing the criminal conspiracy that had orchestrated the entire scheme. By the end, Jonathan and Vanessa's lawyers were visibly shaken, realizing that their clients had committed multiple felonies while trying to execute their fraud. Judge Hernandez took only 30 minutes to render her verdict. This court finds that the plaintiff's claims are not only without merit but represent a systematic attempt to defraud the defendant through perjury, fabricated evidence, and criminal conspiracy, she announced. Mr. Rivers is entitled to nothing from this marriage. Furthermore, this court is referring this case to federal authorities for investigation of multiple criminal violations. But Simone's victory in divorce court was only the beginning. As they left the courthouse, federal agents were waiting to arrest Jonathan and Vanessa on charges of conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and organized crime. The arrests had been coordinated with prosecutors who had been building a federal case based on the evidence that Simone's team had provided. Tyler Brooks's testimony about professional sabotage had led to additional charges related to corporate espionage and market manipulation. "It's over," Rebecca told Simone as they watched Jonathan and Vanessa being led away in handcuffs. "They're looking at decades in federal prison." But Simone felt no satisfaction in watching the man she had once loved being arrested. The victory was necessary, but it couldn't erase the 15 years of her life that had been built on lies. "What happens to their other victims?" she asked. "Federal prosecutors are using your evidence to build cases on behalf of everyone they defrauded," Robert replied. "Some of them will be able to recover their stolen assets, and all of them will see justice served." As news of the arrests spread, other victims of Vanessa's operation began coming forward. The federal investigation expanded to include dozens of cases across multiple states, revealing the true scope of the criminal enterprise that had been operating for nearly a decade. Within weeks, Vanessa's consulting business collapsed as clients discovered they had been working with a criminal organization. Her investment portfolio was frozen and eventually distributed to compensate her victims. Her operatives were arrested or fled the country, ending a criminal network that had destroyed hundreds of lives. Jonathan's consulting business was also investigated and shut down when authorities discovered the extent of his professional sabotage activities. His former clients filed civil lawsuits seeking damages for the business losses they had suffered due to his deliberate misconduct. "They thought they were untouchable," Dr. Torres observed during one of their final team meetings. "They had gotten away with their crimes for so long that they believed they were smarter than their victims and the legal system. Their arrogance was their downfall," Patricia agreed. "They documented their crimes so thoroughly that prosecuting them became a simple matter of presenting their own evidence against them." But the legal victory, while satisfying, couldn't heal the emotional devastation that Simone had experienced. 15 years of her life had been built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. The man she had trusted with her heart had been planning to destroy her from the moment their relationship became financially valuable to him. "How do I move forward from this?" she asked Dr. Torres during one of their sessions. "You remember that none of this was your fault," Dr. Torres replied. "You were targeted by professional criminals who specialize in exploiting good people's capacity for love and trust. The fact that they were able to deceive you doesn't reflect any weakness on your part, it reflects their skill at manipulation." "But how do I ever trust anyone again?" "You learn to trust yourself first," Dr. Torres said. "You've proven that you're strong enough to fight back when betrayed, smart enough to expose even sophisticated deception, and resilient enough to survive the worst kind of personal attack. Those qualities will serve you well in building healthier relationships in the future." As the criminal cases proceeded through the federal court system, Simone focused on rebuilding her business and personal life. The publicity from the case had actually enhanced her reputation as someone who was tough enough to fight back against injustice, leading to new business opportunities and partnership offers. Her company's valuation increased as investors recognized that she had navigated a sophisticated attack on her assets while maintaining operational excellence. Her personal brand evolved from successful entrepreneur to symbol of resilience and strategic thinking under extreme pressure. "You've become a different person through this experience," Tasha observed during one of their regular business meetings. "Stronger, more confident, more aware of your own capabilities." Simone realized that her best friend was right. The betrayal had been devastating, but surviving it had taught her things about herself that she had never known. She was tougher than she had believed, smarter than her enemies had assumed, and more capable of strategic warfare than anyone had imagined. The woman who had been blindsided by a divorce filing 6 months earlier had evolved into someone who could outmaneuver professional criminals and emerge victorious from the most complex legal battle of her career. Jonathan and Vanessa had thought they were destroying her, but they had actually unleashed capabilities that she had never needed to use before. They had turned her capacity for love into a weapon against her, but in doing so, they had taught her to weaponize her intelligence, determination, and strategic thinking skills. As she stood in her office looking out at the city where she had built her empire, Simone realized that she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She had faced the worst kind of betrayal imaginable and not only survived but emerged stronger than before. The game was over and she had won decisively. But more importantly, she had learned how to play at a level that would protect her from anyone who might try to exploit her again. Jonathan and Vanessa had taught her the most valuable lesson of her life, that her capacity for love was not a weakness to be exploited, but a strength that could be protected through wisdom, vigilance, and the strategic application of her formidable intelligence. They had tried to destroy her, but they had actually completed her transformation into someone who was truly unstoppable. 6 months after their arrest, Jonathan Rivers and Vanessa Sterling stood before federal judge William Morrison in a courtroom packed with their victims, law enforcement officials, and media representatives who had followed the case that prosecutors were calling one of the most sophisticated romance fraud schemes in American legal history. The federal investigation had revealed the staggering scope of their criminal enterprise. Over 9 years, Vanessa's organization had defrauded victims of more than $300 million through carefully orchestrated romantic manipulation and business sabotage. Jonathan had been her most successful operative, but the network had included dozens of conspirators who had targeted wealthy individuals across multiple states. Simone sat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by other victims who had come to witness justice being served. Rachel Morrison, the social media executive who had lost $80 million to one of Vanessa's earlier cons, gripped Simone's hand as the judge prepared to announce the sentences. "The defendants in this case represent a new category of organized crime," Judge Morrison began, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority that comes from witnessing the depths of human cruelty. "They weaponized love, trust, and emotional intimacy to destroy lives for profit. Their crimes strike at the foundation of human connection itself." The evidence presented during the federal trial had been overwhelming. Prosecutors had used Vanessa's own meticulous records to demonstrate the systematic nature of her operation. Training manuals for operatives detailed psychological manipulation techniques designed to exploit specific emotional vulnerabilities. Financial records showed the distribution of stolen assets through complex networks of shell companies and offshore accounts. "Ms. Sterling, you operated a criminal enterprise that targeted successful, hard-working individuals and turned their capacity for love into a weapon against them," Judge Morrison continued, addressing Vanessa directly. "You studied your victims like a predator studies prey, identifying their weaknesses and deploying operatives specifically trained to exploit those vulnerabilities." Vanessa stood motionless as the judge outlined the evidence against her. The confident, polished consultant who had orchestrated Jonathan's deception had been replaced by a hollow-eyed defendant who had watched her empire crumble under federal investigation. Her consulting business had been revealed as a front for organized crime. Her investment portfolio had been built on insider trading and market manipulation. Her operatives had been arrested or had fled the country, leaving behind testimonies that detailed the systematic nature of their criminal activities. "The evidence shows that you personally profited from the destruction of dozens of lives," Judge Morrison said. "You collected millions of dollars while your victims faced financial ruin, emotional devastation, and the complete destruction of their ability to trust other human beings." The victim impact statements had been devastating. Rachel Morrison had described losing not just her money but her confidence in her own judgment, leading to years of therapy and an inability to form new relationships. Other victims had spoken about bankruptcy, business failures, and psychological trauma that had persisted long after their financial losses. "Your Honor," Rachel had testified, "they didn't just steal my money. They stole my belief that love could be real and honest. They turned the most beautiful part of human experience into a business transaction designed to destroy me. Similar statements had come from Vanessa's other victims, each describing how the systematic manipulation had left them emotionally shattered and financially devastated. The romance fraud had been particularly cruel because it had exploited their best qualities, their capacity for love, trust, and commitment against them. When it came time for Jonathan's sentencing, Judge Morrison's tone became even more severe. "Mr. Rivers, your case represents a particularly heinous form of betrayal," he said. "Unlike Miss Sterling's other operatives who targeted strangers, you spent 15 years building genuine trust with Ms. Carter before betraying her for profit. You took someone who loved you completely and turned that love into a weapon designed to destroy her life." Jonathan stood with his head bowed, a broken man who had lost everything in pursuit of wealth he would never be able to enjoy. His consulting business had been destroyed when clients discovered the extent of his professional sabotage. His reputation had been permanently ruined by the public exposure of his crimes. His family had disowned him after learning about his systematic deception. "The evidence shows that you spent years gathering intelligence about Miss Carter's business operations while pretending to be her supportive partner," Judge Morrison continued. "You documented her vulnerabilities, recorded her private conversations, and systematically betrayed her trust while planning her financial destruction. The federal investigation had revealed details that were almost incomprehensible in their calculation. Jonathan had been recording conversations with Simone for over 3 years, documenting her business strategies and personal insecurities for Vanessa's use in planning the perfect timing for their con. Email records showed Jonathan discussing Simone's emotional state and business pressures with Vanessa, providing intelligence that was used to optimize their manipulation strategy. He had reported on her work schedule, her stress levels, and her feelings about their relationship, treating the woman he claimed to love like a subject in a criminal investigation. "You turned intimacy into espionage," Judge Morrison said. "You took every moment of vulnerability, every expression of love, every shared dream, and weaponized it against the person who trusted you most completely." But the most damaging evidence had been Jonathan's own words, recorded during planning sessions with Vanessa where he had discussed Simone with casual cruelty that revealed his complete emotional detachment. "She's completely dependent on validation," Jonathan had said in one recording. "If I withdraw emotional support at the right moment, she'll be desperate to please me and more likely to agree to financial arrangements that benefit our position." In another recording he had discussed timing their wedding to coincide with peak asset valuations. "Her company is about to close a major deal that will increase valuation by 40%. If we get married during that window, our community property claims will be maximized." The recordings had been played in court, forcing Simone to hear the man she had loved for 15 years discuss her like a business opportunity to be exploited. The emotional impact had been devastating, but it had also been liberating in a strange way. Any lingering doubt about Jonathan's true nature had been erased by his own words. "Mr. Rivers, your betrayal goes beyond financial fraud," Judge Morrison said. "You committed psychological warfare against someone who loved you. You turned 15 years of shared experiences into a foundation for systematic destruction. Your crimes represent one of the most calculating forms of emotional abuse this court has ever encountered." The sentences reflected the severity of their crimes and the scope of their criminal enterprise. Vanessa Sterling was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for 10 years. In addition to serving her sentence, she was ordered to pay full restitution to all identified victims, essentially forfeiting every asset she had accumulated through her criminal activities. "You will spend the best years of your remaining life in prison," Judge Morrison told her. "And when you are eventually released, you will have nothing left of the empire you built on other people's suffering." Jonathan Rivers received 18 years in federal prison, with possibility of parole after 12 years. His sentence was slightly lighter than Vanessa's because prosecutors acknowledged that he had been recruited into the criminal enterprise rather than founding it. But Judge Morrison made clear that his betrayal of personal trust made his crimes particularly heinous. "Mr. Rivers, you will serve your sentence knowing that you destroyed not just your victim's financial security, but 15 years of genuine love and trust," the judge said. "You traded away the most valuable thing any human being can possess, the complete love of another person, for money you will never be able to spend." Both defendants were also banned from using computers or accessing the internet without supervision for 10 years after their release, preventing them from easily returning to online fraud activities. They were required to register as convicted financial felons, making it virtually impossible for them to work in any industry that required handling other people's money or confidential information. The criminal network that Vanessa had built was completely dismantled. Her operatives received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years, depending on their level of involvement and cooperation with authorities. The investigation led to additional prosecutions in 12 states and 3 countries, as international authorities used the evidence to pursue related criminal organizations. As the defendants were led away to begin their sentences, Simone felt a complex mixture of emotions. Justice had been served, but it couldn't undo the damage that had been done to her life and the lives of other victims. "How do you feel?" Rebecca asked as they left the courthouse. "Empty," Simone replied honestly. "I'm glad they can't hurt anyone else, but it doesn't bring back the 15 years they stole from me." But as they walked through the crowd of media representatives and supporters who had gathered outside the courthouse, Simone began to feel something else, a sense of purpose that went beyond personal vindication. Rachel Morrison approached her with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "I never thought I would see justice for what they did to me. Your courage in fighting back gave me hope that the system could work." Similar thanks came from other victims who had found the strength to testify because of Simone's example. The federal prosecution had only been possible because she had refused to accept the role of victim and had instead chosen to fight back with every resource at her disposal. "You saved lives," Dr. Torres told her as they gathered at a restaurant to celebrate the conclusion of the case. "Not just by exposing this particular criminal operation, but by showing other victims that it's possible to fight back against sophisticated manipulation." Patricia Chin had calculated that the total restitution ordered by the court would restore approximately $250 million to victims of Vanessa's criminal enterprise. While not every victim would be fully compensated, the recovery represented the largest successful prosecution of romance fraud in federal history. "This case will be studied in law schools and law enforcement academies for decades," Robert Martinez observed. "You've created a blueprint for fighting back against organized romance fraud that will help future victims seek justice." But the most meaningful outcome was the relationships Simone had formed with other survivors of the criminal network. They had created a support group that met regularly to help each other heal from the psychological trauma of systematic manipulation. "We're not victims anymore," Rachel Morrison said during one of their meetings. "We're survivors who fought back and won. That's a different identity entirely." The group had also become advocates for legislative changes that would strengthen penalties for romance fraud and provide better resources for victims of financial manipulation. Simone had testified before congressional committees about the need for enhanced prosecution tools and victim support services. "The legal system wasn't designed to handle crimes that weaponize love and trust," she had told lawmakers. "We need new approaches that recognize the psychological warfare involved in these crimes and provide appropriate support for victims who have experienced both financial and emotional devastation." As the criminal cases concluded and the legal aftermath settled into history, Simone realized that her ordeal had transformed her in ways that went far beyond surviving betrayal. She had become a different person, stronger, wiser, and more determined to use her capabilities to protect other people from the kind of systematic manipulation she had experienced. The woman who had been blindsided by divorce papers 18 months earlier had evolved into someone who could outmaneuver professional criminals and emerge victorious from the most complex legal battle of her career. But more importantly, she had become someone who understood that her greatest strength wasn't her business acumen or strategic thinking, it was her refusal to let other people's cruelty change her fundamental nature. Jonathan and Vanessa had tried to teach her that love was weakness and trust was foolishness. But they had actually taught her the opposite, that love and trust were so powerful that criminals built entire enterprises around exploiting them. The fact that her capacity for love had been weaponized against her didn't make love dangerous, it made love precious enough to protect with wisdom and strength. As she stood outside the courthouse watching the prison transport vehicles disappear into traffic, Simone realized that she was ready to start the next chapter of her life. The game was over, justice had been served, and she had emerged not just victorious but transformed into someone who was truly unstoppable. Jonathan and Vanessa had thought they were destroying her, but they had actually completed her evolution into the person she was always meant to become, someone strong enough to love completely while being smart enough to protect that love from those who would exploit it. The most important lesson of her life had been learned. Her capacity for love wasn't a vulnerability to be hidden, but a strength to be protected through wisdom, vigilance, and the strategic application of her formidable intelligence. They had tried to destroy her by turning her greatest strength against her. Instead, they had taught her how to make that strength truly indestructible. 2 years after Jonathan's arrest and 18 months after his conviction, Simone Carter stood on the balcony of her new penthouse office, looking out over a city that had witnessed her transformation from victim to victor. Her company had not only survived the turmoil of the criminal case but had emerged stronger than ever, with a valuation that had surpassed $500 million. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her executive suite, illuminating awards and recognition certificates that covered one entire wall. Forbes had named her Entrepreneur of the Year. Harvard Business School had invited her to deliver the keynote address on resilience and strategic thinking. 3 universities had offered her honorary doctorates in recognition of her advocacy work for fraud victims. But the achievement that meant the most to her was the letter from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, officially thanking her for her cooperation in dismantling what they called the most sophisticated romance fraud operation in federal law enforcement history. Her willingness to fight back had led to the prosecution of 47 criminals across 12 states and had resulted in the recovery of over $300 million for victims. The Victim Advocacy Center is ready for your final inspection, Tasha announced from the doorway of Simone's office. The contractors finished the renovations yesterday, and the first support group meetings start next week. Simone smiled as she followed her best friend and business partner through the halls of their expanded headquarters. The Carter Foundation for Fraud Victims occupied an entire floor of their building, providing free legal assistance, psychological counseling, and financial planning services for people who had been targeted by romance fraud and other sophisticated manipulation schemes. Dr. Torres says we already have 60 people signed up for the initial support groups, Tasha continued. And the legal clinic has received over 200 requests for assistance from fraud victims who couldn't afford private attorneys. The foundation had become Simone's most meaningful project, funded by her personal wealth and staffed by professionals who specialized in helping people recover from systematic manipulation. The center provided everything from immediate crisis intervention to long-term therapy designed to help victims rebuild their capacity for trust and healthy relationships. Any word from Rachel about the congressional testimony? Simone asked. She's confirmed for next Thursday, Tasha replied. The committee is really interested in her proposal for enhanced victim protection laws. Having multiple survivors testify about the need for legislative changes is making a real impact. Rachel Morrison had become one of Simone's closest friends and collaborators in their advocacy work. The social media executive had channeled her experience as a fraud victim into becoming a leading voice for legal reform and victim rights. Together, they had successfully lobbied for stronger federal penalties for romance fraud and better support systems for victims. As they toured the Victim Advocacy Center, Simone felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond personal accomplishment. The space was designed to feel safe and welcoming, with comfortable meeting rooms for support groups, private offices for individual counseling, and a law library where victims could research their legal options. The psychological testing program is particularly innovative, Dr. Torres explained as she joined their tour. We're developing assessment tools that can help people identify manipulation tactics before they become victims. It's preventive rather than reactive mental health care. The testing program represented a breakthrough in understanding how sophisticated criminals targeted their victims. By analyzing the psychological profiles of people who had been successfully manipulated, researchers were identifying common vulnerabilities that could be addressed through education and therapy. We're also working with law enforcement agencies to train investigators in recognizing the signs of organized romance fraud, Dr. Torres continued. Too many cases get dismissed as relationship disputes when they're actually sophisticated criminal conspiracies. The advocacy work had given Simone a sense of purpose that went far beyond business success. While her technology company continued to thrive and expand, her real passion had become protecting other people from the kind of systematic betrayal she had experienced. Ms. Carter? A young woman's voice interrupted their conversation. I'm Sarah Kim, one of the new legal assistants. Could I speak with you for a moment? Simone recognized the nervous energy of someone who was struggling with a difficult situation. Sarah was in her late 20s, well-dressed but with the haunted look that Simone had learned to associate with recent fraud victims. Of course, Simone said, leading Sarah to a private office. What can I help you with? I think I'm being targeted by someone like the people who hurt you, Sarah said quietly. I've been seeing a man for 8 months, and everything seemed perfect until last week when he started asking detailed questions about my business finances. When I researched romance fraud online, I found articles about your case, and the pattern seems identical. Simone felt her protective instincts activate. This was exactly why the Advocacy Center existed, to help people recognize manipulation before it destroyed their lives. Tell me about the relationship, she said gently. Start from the beginning and don't worry about seeming paranoid. Trust your instincts. Sarah's story was heartbreakingly familiar. A charming man who had seemed perfectly suited to her personality and lifestyle. Romantic gestures that were perfectly timed to coincide with business successes. Gradual integration into her professional activities, always framed as supportive interest rather than intrusion. He knows things about my company that I never specifically told him, Sarah said. And last week I found documents in his apartment that looked like they were analyzing my financial assets. When I asked him about them, he said he was just trying to understand my business better so he could be more supportive. Has he suggested any changes to your business structure or financial arrangements? Simone asked. He keeps bringing up the importance of having legal documents that protect both partners in a relationship, Sarah replied. He says he wants us to be transparent about our assets so we can plan our future together. Simone recognized the early stages of a con that followed the same pattern as her own manipulation. Sarah was being positioned for systematic exploitation by someone who had studied her vulnerabilities and was preparing to claim her assets. Sarah, I want you to know that trusting your instincts was exactly the right thing to do, Simone said. You may have just saved yourself from years of manipulation and potentially millions of dollars in losses. They spent the next hour developing a safety plan that would allow Sarah to document her boyfriend's behavior while protecting herself from retaliation. The Advocacy Center's resources would provide her with legal assistance, psychological support, and investigative services to determine whether she was being targeted by an organized criminal operation. The most important thing to remember is that none of this is your fault, Simone told her. If this man is targeting you, it's because you're successful, intelligent, and kind, qualities that criminals exploit but that you should never be ashamed of possessing. As Sarah left the office with a comprehensive support plan and emergency contact information, Simone felt the deep satisfaction that came from potentially preventing another person from experiencing the devastation she had survived. Another save, Dr. Torres observed, having witnessed the interaction. That's the 15th potential victim we've helped identify and escape manipulation attempts this year. How many of them were connected to organized operations? Simone asked. At least 8 that we can prove, Dr. Torres replied. And federal authorities have opened investigations based on our reports. We're not just helping individual victims, we're actively disrupting criminal networks. The afternoon brought a different kind of satisfaction when Simone received a call from her patent attorney with news about her latest technological innovation. The advanced security algorithm she had developed was being licensed by 3 major corporations for implementation in their financial systems. The licensing agreements are worth $40 million over 5 years, her attorney reported. And the technology has potential applications in at least 6 other industries. This could be your most profitable innovation yet. Simone smiled as she reviewed the contracts. Her business had not only survived the criminal attack on her assets but had thrived in ways that exceeded her pre-divorce success. The experience of fighting sophisticated fraud had actually enhanced her reputation as someone who could handle extreme challenges while maintaining operational excellence. The irony is beautiful, Tasha observed when Simone shared the news. Jonathan thought he was going to steal your wealth, but his attack actually made you more successful than you would have been otherwise. It was true. The publicity from the criminal case had raised Simone's profile in the business community, leading to new opportunities and partnerships that might never have materialized otherwise. Investors saw her as someone who had proven her ability to navigate complex challenges and emerge stronger, making her an even more attractive business partner. But the most meaningful change in Simone's life wasn't professional, it was personal. Over the past 6 months, she had been quietly dating Dr. Michael Williams, a cybersecurity expert who had been hired to review her company's data protection protocols after the criminal case. Their relationship had developed slowly and naturally, built on shared interests and genuine compatibility rather than the manufactured perfection that had characterized her manipulation by Jonathan. Michael was brilliant without being competitive, supportive without being intrusive, and interested in her success without trying to claim credit for it. He's nothing like Jonathan, she had told Dr. Torres during one of their sessions. He has his own career, his own achievements, his own sense of self-worth. He doesn't need to define himself through my success. How does that feel different? Dr. Torres had asked. Like I can be myself without worrying that he's studying me for weaknesses to exploit, Simone had replied. Like love can be genuine instead of strategic. Michael had been completely transparent about his background, providing references and financial records without being asked. He had introduced her to his family and long-term friends early in their relationship. Most importantly, he had never shown any interest in the details of her business operations beyond what was necessary for his security consulting work. "He treats my success like it belongs to me," Simone had explained to Rachel during one of their regular coffee meetings. "He's proud of what I've accomplished, but he doesn't act like he contributed to it or deserves credit for it." The relationship was teaching Simone what healthy love looked like after years of sophisticated manipulation. Michael's support felt genuine because it came without strings attached or hidden agendas. His interest in her work was professional rather than predatory. His romantic gestures were spontaneous rather than calculated. "I think I'm ready to trust again," she told Dr. Torres during their most recent session. "Not blindly and not without protecting myself, but genuinely." "What does that look like practically?" Dr. Torres asked. "It means I can love someone while still maintaining appropriate boundaries," Simone replied. "I can share my life without sharing my business passwords. I can be vulnerable without being naive. I can trust Michael's love while still verifying his background and protecting my assets." The wisdom she had gained from surviving systematic manipulation had made her a better partner, not a more suspicious one. She had learned to distinguish between healthy caution and paranoid isolation, between protecting herself and shutting herself off from genuine connection. As the day ended and Simone prepared to leave the office for dinner with Michael, she reflected on how completely her life had been transformed by the ordeal that had nearly destroyed her 2 years earlier. Jonathan and Vanessa had thought they were teaching her that love was dangerous and trust was foolish. Instead, they had taught her that love was so powerful that criminals built entire enterprises around exploiting it, making it precious enough to protect with wisdom and strength. They had thought they were breaking her capacity for love and trust. Instead, they had taught her how to love more wisely and trust more strategically, making her relationship stronger rather than weaker. The woman who had been blindsided by divorce papers 24 months earlier had evolved into someone who could love completely while protecting that love from exploitation. She had learned to weaponize her intelligence and determination in defense of her capacity for genuine connection rather than allowing others to weaponize her love against her. As she left the office building and walked toward the restaurant where Michael was waiting for her, Simone realized that she had achieved something that her attackers had never imagined possible. She had emerged from their assault not just intact but improved. Jonathan had spent 15 years learning her vulnerabilities so he could exploit them. Michael was spending their relationship learning her strengths so he could support them. The difference between manipulation and genuine love had become crystal clear. Vanessa had thought she was destroying Simone's capacity for successful relationships. Instead, she had taught her how to build relationships that were truly indestructible because they were based on genuine compatibility rather than manufactured perfection. The criminals who had tried to steal her life's work had actually given her something more valuable than money. They had taught her the difference between love that exploits and love that liberates, between trust that makes you vulnerable and trust that makes you stronger. As Simone entered the restaurant and saw Michael's genuine smile of welcome, she realized that she had won something far more important than a legal case or financial settlement. She had won back her ability to love fearlessly while protecting that love wisely. The war was over, and she had emerged not just victorious but transformed into someone who was truly unstoppable, not because she couldn't be hurt, but because she had learned how to heal from anything while becoming stronger in the process. Jonathan and Vanessa had thought they were teaching her that her greatest strength was actually her greatest weakness. Instead, they had taught her how to make her greatest strength truly indestructible. They had tried to destroy her by turning her capacity for love into a weapon against her. But they had actually taught her how to turn her capacity for love into an armor that nothing could penetrate, not because it kept others out, but because it was strong enough to let the right people in while keeping the wrong people from doing damage. The game was over, and Simone Carter had won everything that truly mattered. Her business empire was stronger than ever, her advocacy work was saving lives, and her capacity for love had emerged from the assault not just intact but enhanced. She had learned the most important lesson of her life, that the things worth having are worth protecting, and that true strength comes not from avoiding vulnerability but from being strong enough to be vulnerable with the right people while being wise enough to protect yourself from the wrong ones. As she sat down across from Michael and saw the genuine affection in his eyes unmarked by calculation or hidden agenda, Simone knew that she had achieved something that Jonathan and Vanessa would never understand. She had learned how to love without fear while being strong enough to survive anything. The woman who had been targeted for destruction had become truly indestructible, not because she couldn't be hurt, but because she had proven to herself that she could survive and thrive after the worst possible betrayal. Jonathan and Vanessa were serving their prison sentences, their criminal empire was destroyed, and their victims had found justice and healing. But more importantly, Simone Carter had found something that no one could ever steal from her again, the knowledge that she was strong enough to love completely while being wise enough to protect that love from anyone who would try to exploit it. The story of her destruction had become the story of her transformation into someone who was truly unstoppable. And as she reached across the table to take Michael's hand, feeling the simple joy of genuine connection unmarked by manipulation or calculation, she knew that the best chapters of her life were just beginning. The war was over. Love had won. And Simone Carter was ready for whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that she had become someone who could handle anything while never losing her capacity for hope, trust, and genuine human connection. She had been tested by the worst kind of betrayal imaginable, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable of both giving and receiving authentic love. The criminals who had tried to teach her that love was weakness had actually taught her that love was so powerful that it was worth any amount of effort to protect and preserve. And that lesson would serve her well for the rest of her life.